Good morning. Welcome to Hometown Heroes. This is Rick Irving with my co host Mary Staffel, and we have an incredible guest today. This is Tank Gunner Lieutenant Colonel Andrew Hudson, United States Army retired. He's not only a great patriot, but he's also an award winning speaker and award winning author. Received the Combat Infantry Badge, Silver Star, three Bronze Stars, one for Valor, and a Purple Heart during two tours in Vietnam. Tank, thank you for being here today.
Thank you.
And we look forward to hearing some stories because you are indeed a great storyteller. So tell us a little bit about you and how you got in the military, and tell us a story that's memorable from one of your tours in Vietnam.
Okay, thank you, Rick. Thank you, Mary, for having me on board. I appreciate the opportunity. Uh, I joined the Army National Guard when I was in high school at the age of 17. I lived in Marshall, Texas, and my unit was a company in the 146th Armored Infantry Battalion of the 49th Armored Division. My job was a wireman, and as a private, I strung wire all over Fort Hood, Texas during summer camp. And the tanks ran over the wire and cut it up, so I'd have to go back out with a sergeant and string wire and do it all over again. Um, I wanted to go active duty in 1957, and I had a friend, high school classmate, who said, let's join the Air Force on the buddy system. And so we did, and we got on a bus in Marshall and drove to San Antonio to Lackland Air Force Base, got off the bus, went in the reception center, and I never saw my buddy again. He was assigned to a different flight, basic training flight, than I was. Finished basic training, went to Air Police School at Lackland, and had turned 18 by that time. I got on a plane and flew to Paris, France. Can you imagine the culture shock of an 18-year-old Texas kid arriving in Paris, France? Did a tour there for about 3 years, participated in a reduction in force. Uh, the Air Force didn't want me anymore, so I was shipped back to San Antonio, pumped gas for about 3 months, wrote my girl a letter and said, if I come back, will you marry me? And she replied, maybe, we'll see. And the only way I could get back there to Paris, France, was to join the Army Europe unassigned. So I ended up in Frankfurt, Germany as a clerk, administration clerk, had great staff, great commanders supported me, went to the 7th Army NCO Academy as a PFC, and my company commander said, why don't you go to OCS? And I applied twice, failed the first time, passed the second time, ended up in infantry OCS, Fort Benning, Georgia in 1963, graduated, went to jump school, went to Armor Officer Basic, and had a career in the Army as a cavalryman and Army armor officer. That's sort of the beginning. Did two tours in Vietnam. The first tour was 101st Airborne Division, 1st Brigade. I was a platoon leader in A Troop, 17th Cav. We were based at Camp Tuiwa, which was on the coast. Second tour was in 1st Cav Division. I was troop commander of Delta Troop, 1st and the 9th Cav. Did a tour there in May of 69 to November 69 as the troop commander.
Wow. So when you were with the 101st, did you do some jumps in Vietnam?
I did one jump.
Okay.
The paratroopers needed to jump once every 3 months to get paid. When we were at Fort Campbell, a lot of times the opportunities to jump were about every 2 months or so because of the jobs that we had to do. And so in Vietnam, the Finance Center, which was in Indianapolis at the time, made an order that we needed to jump in order to get paid. And so there was a lot of organization, and C-130 aircraft came in to pick us all up so that we could do what we called a Hollywood jump. The problem was that nobody told the bad guys on the ground that we were just doing a pay jump. And so we had a little action, but we didn't get the combat star on our jump wings, but the 82nd Airborne guys did. And we were really, really, really upset about that.
But so your second tour in Vietnam, I've read some of your accounts and some of your stories, and there was a couple of days that will live in your memory forever.
That's correct. As a troop commander, my job was to write monthly operation reports. And each operation report had a daily entry. And some of the daily entries were, 2 or 3 or 4 sentences. And 2 daily entries stick in my mind, and that is September 13th and September 14th, 1969. On September 13th, which was a Saturday, we were ordered to, my cavalry troop, was ordered to take the National Police out on a road that was identified as Road 311. It was south of Fire Support Base Buttons in Phu Long Province. And the National Police job was to stop buses and trucks and bicycles and pedestrians and wagons and whatever was moving on the road to check for contraband. The National Police were not a combat force, but they were in enemy territory. So my cavalry troop was the security for the National Police. And we stationed ourselves along the road at tactical formations to provide security for the National Police. It was an uneventful day, and about 3 or 4 o'clock in the afternoon, I called everybody on the radio to wrap it up and let's go home. And as we began moving down the road to collect the National Police, a hail of gunfire, machine gun and rifle fire and RPGs opened up on a scout squad. A scout squad was 2 Jeeps with pedestal-mounted machine guns. And one of the scout squads, 3-man on the Jeep, Sergeant Schedule, Donald Sidney Schedule, was the squad leader. He had a driver and a machine gunner. And my Jeep was behind Sergeant Schedule on a little knoll. And I told my driver, Ferguson, to gun it so that we could get down where the Schedule was. And I remember dismounting the Jeep and crawling down to sit and kneel beside Sergeant Schedule to get a report about what was going on. And he told me that there was several enemy fire, probably 6 to 8 guys. And I remember the smile on his face looking at me as he gave the report. And I think the smile was, "I'm glad you're here with me," kind of smile. And so I remember that day, and I wrote it in a story that's on the blog. And so we went back to Fire Support Base Buttons, the base camp, and reported to the battalion commander. And the battalion commander said, I want you to go back out with your troop, and I want the battalion scout squad, the infantry battalion scout squad, to go with you, and I want you to drop them off so that they can do a reconnaissance to find out where the guys are, who they are, how many they are. And so we boarded up the next morning with the scout squad back on Road 311, and the job we decided was to drop each person off as the vehicles continued to move, so that it was sort of surreptitious instead of unloading a complete scout squad. So if there were any bad guys in the woods, they could see, but surreptitiously, maybe they couldn't.
Let me ask you a question, and to kind of help our listeners and our viewers uh, know about this cavalry troop. You weren't on foot, you were on horses, but you had jeeps and trucks,
That's correct.
and a certain amount of men in each jeep, each truck, and so it was like a convoy, but you didn't have armored personnel carriers or anything like
No,
that. You were
no,
just out in the open.
exactly. Our horses were Jeeps.
Okay.
I think the nomenclature for the Jeep was an M151. I think I remember that. The cavalry troop platoon, there's three platoons in the troop. The cavalry troop platoon had 4 scout jeeps, and a scout jeep had 3-man crew with a pedestal mounted M60 machine gun. We had 2 jeeps that had a 106 millimeter recoilless rifle, and we had 2 3/4 ton trucks. One truck had an infantry squad, and the other truck had a 81 millimeter mortar and crew. And then you had the platoon leader and the platoon sergeant in jeeps, and that was the makeup of a cavalry platoon.
And you were kind of running short-handed this day. I mean, you didn't have your
I mean,
full.
yeah, we had 66 guys. We had 2 platoons instead of 3. My squadron commander had withdrawn one of my platoons and posted them at Loch Nen as perimeter security for B Troop. And I was kind of upset that I was providing guard duty for another troop commander. And my squadron commander said he may have used the word son. Son, when the general tells me what he wants to do, I do what the general wants me to do. And I would hope that you would do what I want you to do. And I said, 3 bags full, sir. I know what to do.
And those vehicles, they had the recoilless rifles on them, didn't they?
The recoilless rifles were on the mountain.
Okay.
Near Fire Support Base Button, there was a mountain called Nui Ba Ra. And there was Army security and radio stations on top of the mountain to help control air traffic. And my squadron commander wanted me to post a set of recoilless rifles on the mountain. So the 2 platoons didn't have the recoilless rifles. They were on the mountain. 4 recoilless rifles, in fact. And so the infantry squads in the 2 platoons that I had about 6 soldiers instead of the 11 that were supposed to be full staff. So yeah, we were shorthanded that day. I think we had 66 of 130 folks, about half. And then we had the scout squad, the scout platoon, and I think they had about 12. So yeah, we were shorthanded. And so up the road, we drove right into the head of a horseshoe-shaped ambush. And the fight began, and we were all pinned down. The 2 lead scout jeeps and the platoon sergeant all were wounded. All 7 folks. The platoon leader was back at the base camp drawing the pay for the troop. So the lieutenant wasn't available for the second platoon. The lieutenant was available and the third platoon at the rear of the column. And so we were pinned down, and I called the platoon leader of the third platoon, and I asked him if he could shift fire up our way so that we could get up and move out of the kill zone. And I think Sergeant Schedule heard the call, and he mounted his Jeep and stood behind the M60 machine gun, and Sergeant Salvador Silva, was his driver. And they began coming up the road toward me and toward the second platoon, firing his machine gun. And I could see the tracers going into the bad guys' positions. And I could see guys dropping as his bullets found their mark. Well, he's standing up behind the machine gun coming up the road, an easy target. And the NVA devoted their fire on him, knocked him down, and I watched him sit on the top of the radio on the rear fender, still holding his machine gun and firing, and the Jeep was still moving. And another volley knocked him off the Jeep. And at that point, Sergeant Silva drove off the road into the high grass for concealment. And Sergeant Schedule's actions relieved the fire on us so that we could get up and move. And I know that he probably killed maybe a dozen of the enemy soldiers that were firing on us. At the end of the fight, we were able to get to his body and wrap him in a poncho. And I had driven my Jeep down on the shoulder of the road beside him in the center of the road. And we had called, I think the battalion commander had called for an infantry company to come in to do a combat assault, to make a sweep into the enemy positions. And one of the helicopters then was to pick up Sergeant Schedule and Lieutenant Thomas and PSC John Holliday. Lieutenant Thomas was the scout platoon leader, and Jack Holliday was his RTO, his radio telephone operator. And they had sat on the radios on the back fender of the platoon sergeant's Jeep. And they were cut down in the initial fire of the ambush. And so all three bodies were picked up and brought back to fire support base Buttons. But in the meantime, before the choppers got there, Sergeant Schedule was wrapped in a poncho, and two soldiers came out of the tree line to his body. And I was looking across the front of my Jeep, and I was upset because he had been killed. And I kind of yelled at them, "What the hell are you doing?" And they stood up and looked at me, and they said, "We're okay, Six." That was my name. Six was the commander's radio call sign. "We're okay, Six. We just need to get some ammunition and his rifle. We're out of ammunition." And I felt so bad about that because I knew that we had expended a lot of ammunition during the fight.
You were fighting the bad guys. There was more than just a few bad guys out there, wasn't there?
We later estimated maybe 600, a reinforced battalion. We later learned that they were probably set up to ambush a convoy that was bringing supplies up to the Vietnamese uh, folks in Phuc Binh, Phuc Long Province, and Song Bay. We had no clue that the convoy was coming up, but later learned that that may have been why the bad guys were there, was to ambush the convoy and get all the supplies.
And the way it happened, you were a little strung out, so they weren't able to surround you completely because
That's
of the
correct.
distance.
Yeah, a horseshoe-shaped ambush is visually uh, a horseshoe, and so the rear end of the horseshoe is open, and the objective is to get the enemy, us, inside, and then close around the end of it to surround us. Well, the uh, the lead scouts going down the road with the scout squad, scout platoon, had requested permission to do a recon by fire, and I had gotten permission for that from the battalion commander, and the two lead machine guns were firing in the tree lines and along the road, the shoulder of the road, as we were approaching the point where we were going to drop the scout platoon off. Well, we believe that the recon by fire triggered the horseshoe shaped ambush early, and triggering it early prevented the enemy from surrounding us because the third platoon, the rear platoon, cavalry platoon, was extended beyond where the bad guys were hidden. And so that prevented us from being surrounded. And we had a cavalry troop had so much firepower with um, four M60 machine guns and all the rifles that the soldiers were using. And the 81 mortar, for a short time, was able to drop rounds into those positions. But as I call for gunships to come in to give us support, the mortars had to stop because they couldn't fire a mortar round with fear of hitting a helicopter, a gunship helicopter. So it was kind of a hectic moment. But you're right, Rick. They were not able to surround us with the ambush.
And how long did this battle last? It lasted for a
Uh,
little while, didn't it?
Estimated about 4 hours. I picked up the scout platoon at 11. They were providing security for a detachment of three artillery pieces because on fire support based buttons, the artillery couldn't fire uh, long distance because they had to shoot over the mountain to provide fire support for troops that were south of the mountain. And so troops that were extended south of the mountain couldn't get the artillery fire. So the artillery battalion commander dispatched three guns, 105 millimeter towed guns, south of the mountain. And the scout platoon was the security for those three guns. And so my job was to pick up the scout platoon from those three guns, and the guns would go back to the fire support base unescorted, and we would go down the road 311. Yeah, and so about 11, I met Lieutenant Thomas and Jack Holliday. And on the hood of my Jeep, I spread out the map sheet and with platoon leaders and platoon sergeants and the command group, we made a plan of what we were going to do and how we were going to do it. And I remember asking Lieutenant Thomas if he wanted to eat lunch first. because it was, kind of noonish, and lunch was sea rations, of course. And he said, no, let's get on with the job. And once we get deployed in the jungle, then we'll sit and do our sea rations and make kind of reconnaissance to see where we are and what we need to do and where we need to go. And so that was the plan. We were going to move up the road, drop them off, sit on the road in a tactical formation, my cavalry troop, while they got situated and secure, and everybody would eat lunch or sea rations in position and enjoy the day and do our job. Well, it didn't turn out that way, obviously, and the fight was about 4 hours long. And one of the gunships had a little reel-to-reel tape recorder connected to his radios, and he recorded about 40 minutes of the fight. And that recording is posted on War Stories. And so when we got back to the base camp that night, I told the battalion commander what Sergeant Schedule had done, and that I was going to write a citation for the Medal of Honor for Sergeant Schedule. And I did, and I submitted that up the chain of command. Never heard anything. And then in 1972, I got a letter from General Patton, who was the commandant of the Armor Center and School. And he invited me to the dedication of Schedule Hall at Fort Knox, Kentucky. And Schedule Hall was a training complex that had tank facsimile of tank turrets in the building, so that tank loaders and tank gunners could train in a facsimile tank turret without being on a firing range. And I went there in 72 and made a little speech about Sergeant Schedule and his action on that day in September 14th, 69. And then we went upstairs on the second floor of Schedule Hall as a reception. And I was standing with my squadron commander, Pete Booth, Colonel Booth, and General Patton, and we were talking. Well, I wasn't talking. I was a major. I was listening to a general and a colonel talk. And the general's aide came to me and he said, Sergeant Schedule's mom and dad would like to talk with you, because they had been invited to the dedication of Schedule Hall. And I said, of course, I'd love to talk with them. And so we were escorted to a little office, and the aide directed me to sit behind the desk. And Sergeant Schedule's mom sat on one chair and his dad sat on the other. And the moment that she sat, even before I could say much to her, she said, "Did my boy suffer?" And I said, no, he didn't. And I talked with him for about an hour and a half. And then we were escorted down to the exit of Schedule Hall. And at the doors, there was a large portrait that an artist had done from a photograph of Sergeant Schedule. And his mom and dad and I were standing admiring the photograph, and she said, "I really miss my boy." And I made a picture. The photographer made a picture of that portrait and sent a picture of it to me later. I was at Fort Lewis, Washington, and for the life of me, I have no clue where I put it. I can't find it anymore. And so, Sergeant Schedule folks received his Medal of Honor. Vice President Spiro Agnew did that at the White House. And years later, their house burned and they lost his medal in the fire. And a congresswoman, I think her name is Collins, got involved with the Department of Defense and the Secretary of the Army, and they reissued a Medal of Honor so the parents could keep it. And this is a photograph of Sergeant Schedule. It is a basic training photograph of him. Years later, I exchanged Facebook messages with one of his daughters, Tammy, and she asked me if I would talk with his son, Terry, because Terry had been traumatized by the loss of his dad. And I said yes. Terry was probably 3 or 4 or 5 when Sergeant Schedule had been killed. And I said yes. And I gave Tammy my phone number and said he could call me anytime. And days went by and weeks went by and I never got a call. And so I asked Tammy why. And she said, Terry is still uncomfortable about it. And so we never talked. And I'm a little disappointed that I wasn't able to share his dad's story with him. And then 3 or 4 months ago, a lady by the name of Crystal Small sent me a friend request on Facebook. And Crystal is a great niece of Sergeant Schedule. And she wanted to write his story from his birth to the time that he went into the military service and asked me if I would help. And I said, of course, I would help her. And she is still busy collecting notes. She learned a lot of his story from her great aunts. And I'm hopeful that I'm going to be able to help her tell his story.
I'll bet you will. I'll bet you'll be able to. There were 2 other men that died that day.
Lieutenant Michael Herman Thomas. Mike was the scout platoon leader, scout squad leader, scout platoon leader of the 5th Battalion, 7th Infantry. And he was, I think, 24, 25. This is a high school picture from his yearbook. And I used this picture from the Vietnam Memorial Fund website. I think it's Vietnam Veteran Memorial Fund website. And that website is the one that sponsors all of the stories and pictures of soldiers who are on the wall.
And he earned the Silver Star. I mean, he was awarded the Silver Star.
I wrote the citation for his Silver Star. Yes. and I wrote the citation for Jack Holliday. Jack was, this is a high school picture of John Holliday, Halladay, Holliday. He went by the nickname of Jack, and I wrote the Bronze Star Valor citation for him. Now,
Well, you had a busy day with all the reports and then all the other citations that you wrote for uh, some of your other troops that
I did,
were
yeah,
wounded in action or did a lot of
yeah.
heroic things.
Sergeant Silva, the driver, I wrote a citation of Silver Star for him. Sergeant Silva did his tour and went back to home in California, and he worked as a. I'm not sure of the correct technical name, but it was an artist for Walt Disney Studios, and he may have been. He was a supervisor manager in Walt Disney artistic studios that do the cartoons and do all the images. And his wife, Sergeant Silva's wife, Jeanette, exchanged Facebook requests with me, and we've been friends, Facebook friends, for a number of years. And she told me that Sergeant Silva suffered from Hodgkin's disease because of Agent Orange.
Oh, goodness.
And probably all of us have that issue, Agent Orange. Yeah.
And here's a picture of you in your office.
That's right. This is my executive office.
And it looks to me like you are using your iPhone to
yeah,
surf the internet.
That's my iPhone. Yeah, I've looked at that picture 1,000 times. My FO Tom Mahoney was a photographer, an amateur photographer. I think he had 2 or 3 cameras strapped around his neck while he was calling in artillery for us every day. But anyway, he was the photographer, and he made this picture. And for the life of me, I have no clue why I'm looking at the radio handset. I don't know if somebody is talking to me on the radio, or whether there's a tear in the rubber of the radio, or whether there's a mosquito on the. I have no clue why I'm looking at it, but it is a kind of a neat picture, and I use the term that this is my executive office. Now, if you look at me, I do not have my helmet on, but look at the guys in the background. They have their helmets on. And I want to tell you this war story. When I took command of the troop, everybody called themselves the Rat Patrol, and they wore floppy hats. And I put an end to that pretty damn quick. I said, we are not the Rat Patrol. We are a cavalry troop, and we are in a combat zone where people get hurt. Put your helmets on. I don't want to see anybody in a combat area without the helmet. Now, on the fire base, yeah, you can wear your ball cap, you can wear your floppy hat, you can go bald headed, whatever you want to do. But out in the woods, we wear our helmets. And look at me, I don't have one on. Go figure, right?
That's
hey, Tank,
right.
I have a question.
Let me say, do as I do, but what does that say? Yeah.
Do as I say,
not as I do.
Yeah. Okay, yeah. Barry, go ahead.
So, a lot of people through the course of wars, the many that we've been involved in, have done heroic things, but there's not always somebody there that's willing to write any kind of a citation for them. What made it so important to you that, because you obviously wrote a lot of citations, you caught a lot of people doing things that you felt were deserving of that recognition. And you wrote those, and there were so many other people that didn't do it. Why was it so important to you to make sure to document that and to give them the recognition they earned?
I had the honor and privilege to stand among great soldiers. They did their job every day and deserved all the recognition that all of us could give them. And I will never forget the feelings that I had being with great men. And so I think that's maybe why. Yeah.
And
Yeah.
you were one of those great men. You were a
Well,
leader of those great men.
Yeah. I was the troop commander, and I had the honor to be with them, to stand among their ranks. Yeah.
One thing that I read that you had written was about Sergeant Schedule, and you said that even though he was miles and miles away from his home, he didn't die alone because he was with his friends
He
and
did
his
not.
brothers in arms.
He did not. That's true. And we had a memorial for him and for Lieutenant Thomas and for Jack Holliday at Fire Support Base Buttons. And I had asked the battalion commander if one of the infantry companies could take up our perimeter positions while everyone in the troop could attend the memorial service for Sergeant Schedule. And I volunteered us to take up the perimeter positions when the battalion commander had a memorial service for Lieutenant Thomas and for Jack Holliday. And I did that so that all of us could be there for Sergeant Schedule. Yes, we were all one, and that is rare. That is very rare, and it was very special.
And we in the last 40 minutes or so, we have just gone through just 2 days of life in Vietnam, and you had 2 tours.
Yeah.
And later in life, you started writing about these, and you've got a fantastic blog post or a blog with hundreds of stories, hundreds of pictures. It's so in depth. I start reading it and I think, gosh, so much detail. And how did that happen that you started writing?
In 2009, my son Rich found 4 combat operation reports I had written in 1969 on the Texas Tech Vietnam Center and Archive website. The reports had been posted by the 1st Cavalry Division Association, and the monthly reports were for August, September, October, and November. And I was able to get a copy of those 4 reports and began reading every daily entry. And I began living again those days with those soldiers in those situations. And so I sent an email to the contact at Texas Tech, and I asked if they would put this little combat tape, 40 minutes or so, on a CD for me. Because now we don't use little reel-to-reel tape recorders anymore. 40 years later, we have CDs and DVDs. And they agreed to do that and made a CD and invited me to participate in their oral history project. And they sent 109 questions for me to answer to prepare for the interview for the oral history project. And I began answering all these 109 questions. And as I began doing that, I began elaborating and clarifying the one or two or three sentences in each daily entry of those 4 reports. And so I had all this information now that I call stories. And I asked Texas Tech if I could post their questionnaire and my answers on a website that my son had. And they said no, their questionnaire was proprietary. And I honored that. I said, okay, I won't use your questionnaires, but all the answers are mine, so I can use my answers. And I began writing what I call war stories. And I got to the point where I had a lot of them. I'm going to say 50 or so. And I didn't know what to do with them. And so I got a brochure in the mail from Brookhaven College. Brookhaven College was a community college in Dallas. And so I enrolled in a creative writing class at Brookhaven College. And my instructor, Captain Lee Sneath, we call him Captain because he's a certified sailboat captain. So I honor him by calling him Captain. And one of the first classes, he called me Colonel. And I said, yeah, I'm an Army Lieutenant Colonel. And he said, well, I outrank you. And I laughed and I said, yeah, okay, I get it. He said, I outrank you because I'm the instructor and I'm the captain in the class. And so I've called him captain for 12 years. And that was a good story. I need to write that war story too, but I haven't done. Anyway, I brought 7 of my war stories to about the 3rd class, and I passed them out to my classmates and my instructor. And the next week, they came back and reacted to them. And my instructor, Captain Lee, said, well, your stories are pretty good, but they read like reports. They don't read like a story should read. And I was kind of offended. I said, well, I write reports a lot, and I thought this was a good war story. And he said, no, stick with me, and I'll help you learn how to write stories. And he said, I give prompts to do it. And what you can do is use one of my prompts and use your war story and make a fiction story out of it. And so in one of the classes, as I had passed the stories out, I asked the classmates if they knew much about Vietnam. Of course, this is 42 years later. And one of the classmates says, yes, they know quite a bit. They watch MASH on TV. that Captain Lee and I suppressed our giggles when we heard that. Anyway, I kind of stuck with him, and I've been with him for 12 years, and I used his prompts, classroom creative writing prompts, to rearrange some of my war stories, and I began writing fiction stories. And I went on and on and on with classes, and finally he said, why don't you write a book? And I said, I don't know how to write a book. And he said, well, use your war stories and make an anthology of your war stories in a book. And so I did, and I published 60 stories in the first book called Prompts, a collection of stories. And I titled it Prompts, a collection of stories, because I didn't know how to title a book. And so prompts, a collection of stories, kind of fit the theme of it. And two of the stories later were award winners in an international short story contest. And then I continued to write stories in each class, and he said, "Why don't you do another book?" And I
Now,
said,
how old were you when you were doing this? I mean,
the first book I published, I was 76.
okay, so it's never too you're never too old to do something. I mean,
I encourage people to write their stories now, whether they're teens or seniors. Yeah.
at 76 you published your first book.
Prompts, a collection of stories. At 77, I published Prompts 2, TOO, a play on words, has 57 short stories, and two of the stories in Prompts 2 won in International Short Story Contest. I got another prompt. It is called a Meet Cute prompt. A Meet Cute prompt. Let me refer it this way. The movie Harry Met Sally is a meet cute movie. And so the meet cute prompt was two people bump into each other. Well, I wrote the story and then I wrote the book Cookie Johnson. Cookie Johnson is a young man who paid an Army recruiter $10 to be a cook in the Army. Ended up in Vietnam as an infantry rifleman. Never got his money back, but he did find love with his Army nurse, Lieutenant Katie Patton. Now, Cookie has been injured in an explosion and burned, and he's laying naked on a hospital bed. And Lieutenant Katie Patton comes in to take care of him and stumbles and reaches out and grasps part of Cookie's naked body. And the imagination, obviously, is what she grasped because she released it pretty quick. And the other nurse said, I've seen that happen before, too. And so that was the meet cute moment prompt. And it resulted in a book called Cookie Johnson. That was the third book that I wrote at 78.
You stay pretty busy because you've got 9 books and you're coming out with a 10th book, correct?
Yeah, I did a book a year. It takes me about 6 months to write the book, another month or so to do the final read, final edit, and get it published. About 6-8 months before it's in hand. And
here's a link to your bookshelf where all of your books are, and people can go to this link and they can see the writings that the books you've written and order those books.
Yeah, Tank Gunner 6 blogspot.com.
And you encourage other people to reduce their stories to writing and learn to write those stories to be able to share with their families and other people.
Exactly. Well, there's a lot of people who like to write their stories, but they don't want to share them with anybody. And that's not the way to do it. People need to know your story. People need to know your life. People need to know what you think and how you feel and how you love and how you cry and how you hurt and how you feel happy. So I do a show mainly to senior communities and book clubs and associations. And I encourage them to write their poetry, to write their memoirs, to write their short stories, or even write a book. And I encourage them to join Captain Lee's creative writing classes. He does it by Zoom. What we're looking at here is a poster with all of the books and a brief bio. And up in the white space at the top, I think I used the words an almost famous historical fiction author or something like that. Yeah. And I get that tag, almost famous, from Captain Lee and a classmate who passed away with pancreatic cancer about 4 years ago, Wayne Peterson. Wayne was a hard science fiction novelist, published 3 books, and moved to hospital in Houston when he was in his final stages. And Captain Lee and I had planned on Tuesday to go down, and I received a phone call Sunday morning from his daughter that he had passed away. So we did not have the opportunity to go down and see Wayne before we lost him. But yeah, I do a book a year. Palamino was following Cookie Johnson. Palamino is a fictitious town east of Paris, Texas. And for those who may know, north of Paris, a few miles is a military camp called Camp Maxey. Camp Maxey is still there, still active with the Army National Guard. But during World War II, my dad, excuse me, losing my voice. My dad trained at Camp Maxey in 42, and I trained at Maxey in 82, 40 years later. Wow. And so there's a little history there. But Palamino is about 3 prisoners of war coming from Camp Maxey to live and work in a small Texas town, and they get caught up in all the goings on in a small town.
So Palamino, Texas is not a town, is it?
No, it's based on Newport, Texas, where I grew up as a kid.
Because whenever I was doing a little research, I started typing it in. I get Palamino Court or Palamino this or Palamino.
Right. Palamino, Texas. Well, the book comes again from a prompt. The prompt was about a cattleman riding a fancy horse. And in my story, my short story, Captain Porter, who is the cattleman, is riding his horse Rufus. And Rufus is bitten by a rattlesnake, a water moccasin, and rears up and throws Captain Porter off of the horse, and both are killed from the snake and from the fall. And so the cattle herders, the ranchers around the campfire, are debating whether to continue the cattle drive to the railhead or stay where they are along Mustang Creek. And they decide who would know that we don't go and we keep the cattle and divide them up and live here. And so they decide to do that. And around the campfire, they say, well, what are we going to call our town? And the youngest around the campfire, the youngest herder, says, well, why don't we call it Palamino, which is the horse that Captain Porter had, a Palamino horse. And the cattleman said, we didn't think you were very smart, but that's a good name for the town. So that's how Palamino came about, from a prompt, from a creative writing prompt. Yeah. And so that's the jewel of Captain Lee's prompts, is the imagination just blossoms into a story, and then it can grow into a book. And so I encourage everyone, and Rick, I told you off camera earlier, you need to write your stories. I know you do journals. Mary, I don't know about you, but I know that you have a lot of war stories too.
Well,
as an Air Force veteran.
Does.
As an Air Force veteran, yeah, you've been there, done that. So you need to write your stories too.
Jim Vinson's on me all the time about writing a story. So he gave me his book that he wrote about his life, and he said, you got to do this. And he tells everybody the same thing here. You got to do it. You got to do it.
Got to do it. Yeah.
And here's one of our friends, Terry Burgess, Gold Star Dad. He said, I had the pleasure of meeting Tank at Half Price Book and getting an autographed copy of Palamino. Tank signed it for Brian. So,
yeah, Brian was killed in action.
He sure was.
And Terry and I communicated heart to heart when he told me about his boy.
Yeah,
and I felt his pain, and I felt his honor about his son serving us, serving our nation, and standing in harm's way.
Because where you have come from in Vietnam, you've seen the sons like Brian fall and die. And so you have a totally different perspective than Mary or I would have to be able to really communicate, not just in words, but just, in love and in compassion for people like Terry that have lost a son. So.
Yes. No. And I have to say that sometimes when I share my stories with others, it's good therapy.
Yeah.
Absolutely. And that's what you told me the other day about you do a lot of book signings, and you said it's good therapy for them.
It is, yeah. Some folks come to a bookstore because they live alone, and they come to the bookstore to browse and to pick up a book, and they can sit at a table in the bookstore, almost like a library, and read part of the book, and sometimes they strike up conversations with other people in the bookstore or even the employees in the bookstore. Well, when I'm doing a book signing and I'm at the table with my books, they come to see and talk about my books. I tell them about my books. And then they begin telling me their stories. And I find that very helpful for me to hear their stories, because one of their stories may be a clue to me how to write another story that I'm thinking about writing. And sometimes I find that it's very helpful for me to sit there with my mouth shut and listen. And I do that a lot on purpose, because a lot of folks who live alone don't have anybody to talk to. And I'm there for them to talk to me. And I enjoy that. And I hope they do too.
We've enjoyed having you on today. I mean, it's just the 2 days in the life of a Vietnam veteran that you've shared. And there's another story that I want to hear from you too sometime, and that's in October of 1969 of the helicopter crash. So,
Yep.
and as I read more of your stories, I'll have other stories I want you to tell me, because there's just something special about listening to somebody that was there that can tell the story. So, and we look forward to having you at Roll Call.
Happy to do that. Yes.
And you and Mary can talk about that, because, you have the kind of stories that our folks like to hear. So.
Very good. Thank you for having me. It was my pleasure. I hope that I was entertaining for you and your audience. And I look forward to talking with you more about stories. And I want you to write, both you, Rick and Mary, write your stories.
And there's a fellow here you might know, Rob Hudson. He said, "Love you, Dad."
Yeah. Yeah. Thanks, Rob. Rob's our younger son. He has his architectural business. He does architectural jobs for many clients, and so his company is called RDH Architecture. So,
Rob, thank you for joining in today. And to other children out there that are children of veterans, talk to your parents about their time in the service, because I just, my dad died about 27 years ago, and he was a United States Marine in the South Pacific for 2.5 years, and I never asked him about his stories.
here's my suggestion. Sometimes the veteran is reluctant to tell stories because they're worried that there's no interest. There is interest. There is deep interest in the stories. So my suggestion to those who approach dad or uncle or brother or cousin or nephew or friend, give a prompt. And once you give the prompt to the veteran and use your imagination, give a prompt, tell me about what this was, or tell me about what that was. And once you give the prompt, be quiet. Don't interject. Don't say, oh, well, I heard this story about that. Don't do that. You've given the prompt. Be prepared to listen.
That's some good wisdom there.
And I'm kind of harsh, but I'm going to say it this way. Once you've done that, shut your mouth. Open your ears.
Absolutely.
And it'll flow.
That's right. Well, Tank, thank you so much for joining us today.
You bet.
And we will be in touch.
Okay, good deal. Thank you, Mary. Thank you, Rick.
Thank you, sir. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.
Okay, there's Mary. I lost you.
There I am.
Wow. That was an incredible story.
That's something. And there are so many of those stories out there. And, unlike a lot of folks that didn't find it worth taking the time to write the citations, he took the time to write the citations. And people involved today in whatever they're doing as they're serving could take a lesson from that, because it's one of the things that I've heard so often in my time as a first sergeant when I talk to the leadership about, how come we don't have, we haven't recognized anybody for anything, and people have done things that they're deserving of recognition, and they're just like, oh, I don't know how to do it, or I don't have time to do it, or whatever. He certainly didn't have time to do it, but he made time to do it because it was. So we got to definitely write those stories.
We got Terry. He's been jumping in here quite a bit. I
saw that. Yeah,
got to spend 3 days at the Gold Star Parents Retreat a couple of weeks ago, and Terry's just taken from the deepest, darkest days of his life when Brian was killed, to be able to come from that to help so many people around the country as they deal with the things that he dealt with in losing a child. So we're just surrounded by some great people.
Amazing people.
And we need to get Tank hooked up with Craig from Texas A&M so he can finish his
from Texas Tech. Right, from Texas Tech.
Yeah, from Texas, Texas Tech.
Yeah,
and then get him with Chuck Hobbs, too.
When he mentioned that, I thought he probably had been involved with it, but I definitely want to make sure that Kelly has him on his radar screen.
Absolutely.
Right up his alley.
And we had a great roll call last Friday.
It was awesome. Jim Thomason and his story and the way Kelly did the moderation and the questioning was it was really a really great story to listen to, and the whole flow of it was amazing. And we've had nothing but great comments about the lunch. So we appreciate that, because that was a lot of work and a lot of concern, and how's this going to go this year and all that other good stuff you go through.
But it all happened and it turned out good. How many people do you think we had?
I'd say around 700.
Okay.
That'd probably be a good number.
That's a lot of people. You've had a lot of stuff going on this spring.
Yes. And
we have,
it didn't help that we were trying to plan this at the same time as they were working on the air show. So we had so many competing priorities, but it all worked out. It all worked out good.
Well, security wise, I mean, that wasn't a big deal to have 500 or 600 extra people after they'd had thousands and thousands the week before. So
for sure. Right.
They did a great job. You did a great job.
Oh, thanks.
So
it's always a labor of love. You're out there with the camera and I'm doing what I do. And it's, we do it because we love it and we love the veterans.
And did you go to Hops and Props? Were you able to make it out there?
No, we opted to not take the trailer out there, and it's not big. And it didn't rain, but it's not rain so much as it is wind when it whips through that trailer. So if you bring all of that museum quality stuff and you have it on display, and then the wind starts whipping through there, you got to close it up. You can't have it. We can't have it in that kind of a situation. So it wasn't worth the risk. And as high as those winds got that day, we would have not been able to put anything out. It would have all had to been in the cases, and we don't have that many cases.
And with your forecast like it was, rain, maybe a lot of rain, no rain, and you really don't need to take that chance. So we have Don's birthday coming up.
We do. We have that coming up this Saturday. So that'll be at the Boomer Jacks off of Quebec and 820 North up there in Lake Worth. At Boomer Jacks on the patio. It's going to be a come and go Dutch treat. We'll have cake out there. It'll be 12 to 3. And, just swing by and, say hello, wish him a happy birthday. Anybody can come out. There's no RSVPing, none of that. So feel free to come out and join us to celebrate Don's 99th birthday. He's out speaking this morning at a school in high school history classes, a couple of high school history classes today, or yesterday he did that. Today he's going to go sing at the screening of that documentary, The Relentless Patriot. Thursday he's going to be out at a homeschool speaking there on their history project. So, it's not like he's not doing anything all week and resting. He's got a busy week and then his party. So how do you get to be 99 and still going like Don?
Still going strong.
You don't stop. You just don't sit down.
And roll call is the 20. What day is it? The 20.
I think it's the 24th, if I remember right. That fourth Friday, the Friday before Memorial Day. And we always think, we're not going to have that many people. We have just as many. The RSVP for that will open on Monday at 9 a.m. And so, everybody that's already a member will get the email that tells them it's open the last time, because this one is back at Birchman. And that means that we're limited, so we can't have 700 people. And the last for March, we took us less than 3 full days to fill up the RSVPs that we could take. So
it's the hottest ticket in town.
If you want to come, you have to RSVP like in the first day or two. When you get to the third day, it's very highly likely that it will be completely full.
That's going to be exciting. Dwayne Lee, he's going to be talking about Normandy, correct?
Yes, Dwayne Lee, and he's going to definitely talk about Normandy. He does a whole program over there. He's also going to talk about and open up the opportunity for folks to sign up there for the We may end up having to have 2 roll call trips in 2025, but he'll start signing folks up for that if they'd like to go to Normandy. And he's keeping it as affordable as you possibly can with today's prices. So, and you got plenty of time to pay for it. So you pay for it over time. He'll talk about all of that, but he's going to definitely share some things about Normandy, as many of our World War II veterans, most of the ones that will be at that luncheon, will be leaving the following week to go to Normandy.
That'll be exciting for them.
Yeah.
Busy time.
Busy.
We'll have a month off in July, but we'll
That's
probably
right.
still be busy. Well, thank you everybody for being a part of Hometown Heroes podcast for this week. And we just thank Tank for sharing his stories with us. And we look forward to seeing you next week, same time, same station, for Hometown Heroes. And God bless.